Hi everyone, Vivek here from Meaningful Ideas and Gentle Parents Unite. I do a coaching call every week with the parents that I support, and before I do the coaching call, I always give a little talk, and today's talk was on cooperation. Cooperation is something that's really intense. It's something that parents struggle with a lot, and at the same time, when we can get a flow of cooperation, it's something that's really beautiful. And so in this talk, I explained some ideas about how to increase cooperation in your home in a way that's not coercive, not manipulative, but really about connecting and creating deep relationships and working with the environment in such a way that kids want to cooperate because it's meaningful to them. And when it becomes meaningful to them, not from fear, not from pain, not from obligation, but when it's actually meaningful to them, then it takes on a life of its own. So please have a listen to this talk. I'd also love for you to follow me on Meaningful Ideas on Facebook and YouTube and Instagram. And if you want to work with me personally, I have a parent support space that you can join. This is where I give these weekly talks. I actually talk 2 or 3 times a week, plus I do meditations. It's a really great thing. You can check me out at gentleparentsunite.com/membership. That's where our membership space exists. And so here's the talk. Let me know what you think. I just want to talk a little bit about cooperation today. And I'm not going to go into too much depth about it because really it's a very deep topic. But there was a post in Becoming Gentle about cooperation and chores and that kind of thing. And it's probably in the top 10 of the questions that we see from parents. You know, like in GPU, we have so many thousands of people. So we have the good fortune of being able to follow quite a large sample size of people and notice the patterns and the most common questions that get asked and the most common struggles that parents have. And cooperation is certainly one of the top. But the idea of the concept of cooperation is certainly one that is super challenging. Cooperation, I think of cooperation as similar to how I think about things like brushing teeth and homework and things like that. And it's a multi-layered thing. Those things are rarely ever one cause and one effect. And that's one of the reasons that traditional parenting often moves towards coercion is because the model that's based on is looking at one cause and one effect. They're looking at the effect and then kind of creating a single cause from it, and then addressing that single cause. And it's actually multi-causal, like most things are. And cooperation is also something that that if we work at it from the outside in, it's much less effective than if we work from the inside out with our kids and with ourselves. So the first thing that I want to address, because you know me, if you know me, the first thing that I want to suggest is that our feelings as parents that we have around the cooperation or lack of cooperation from our kids is perfectly natural. It's natural, it's valid, and reasonable. Most of the time, a lot of the time, the emotional stress comes from other layers inside of us as well, right? Like our past. Maybe we have felt unsupported as children and in our relationships and in our friendships and in our professional life. And so now our kids are not jumping into support, and we feel that's yet another situation in our lives where we're not getting support. And so then it touches on those older wounds, those deeper set wounds and patterns inside of us. And a lot of the time, those patterns are based on reality too, right? Like, if you were treated that way, then it's real for you. And a lot of the time, it can also be just the pure physical experience where if no one's helping you out and everything kind of lands on your lap, it can be really overwhelming because then you also have so many other things that you're wanting to and needing to attend to, especially if you have multiple kids, and then you want to be present for them. But even with one, you want to be present for them and emotionally engaged but then you're spending all the time cleaning and picking up after them, and then that can be really frustrating because you feel the loss of the other stuff and the frustration of the other stuff going by the wayside, or the sacrifice of that. And so the pain that we feel around it, the feelings that we have around it, frustration and pain and abandonment and lack of support and all those things, lack of being cared for, lack of belonging, or not having that community feeling that we really want, that close-knit community feeling in our families, those things are hard, they're painful, and that pain is real. And so the first thing is to really be able to give ourselves validation for our feelings, because our feelings are valid. And this is something that we can forget about ourselves. And it's important for us to remember that. So that's the first thing. And then, of course, we want to look into how we manage our feelings. And I've talked a lot about that. We talk about giving ourselves empathy and holding space and finding ways to work through our feelings and to validate them and the inner compassion. And somebody recently posted that they created their own calm down corner and micro meditations and all sorts of other stuff that we can do, including get empathy from people, which can really help. The other half of working with our emotions is to check ourselves for projecting them. And that's my saying, right? It's NRNP, which is no repression, no projection. I always want to say no rejection because it rhymes with projection, and I'm trying to say repression, but I end up saying rejection because it rhymes with projection. But it's no repression, no projection, NRNP. And I love my acronyms, as you know. And so then the other half of it is that we want to work at, and it's work. We want to work at not projecting those feelings onto our kids. That's why I say we can feel the feelings without operating from them. And so this is a practice. It's not easy. And the reason this is important is for a couple of things. One is when we do project onto them, it actually makes the whole experience of trying to create the cooperation that we seek, makes it much harder. Every time we project, they feel it, and what's the reaction to that projection is putting an armor up, and some distance. And so that's why projecting is very challenging. It's challenging not to do it also, and that's one of the reasons why self-forgiveness is so important, because we're going to do it. Even though I'm saying, oh, don't do it, we're still going to all do it. And I've been practicing for 23 years. I still do it. And every time I do it, I notice it, and I do the process. I process it myself. The other day I projected something onto my kid, and it took me days. I felt bad. I felt so bad about it, and I felt afraid, and I was like, oh no, I've ruined it. I ruined everything. And I just had this whole thing I went through for like 2 or 3 days, and I could feel myself. I could feel the fear, and I could feel the guilt and the shame, and I made a mistake. And for all the work that I do, I'm still really hard on myself when I do something like that. And so it takes me some time to work through. And then the repair process, working through the repair process, because I know that the thing that I'm trying to create, the thing that I want, I'm going to be much more effective in achieving it from a place where I'm centered, connected to my center, where I'm seeing the situation more objectively, and less through the filter of my emotions. And that's why no projection is so important, because those emotions can cloud our capacity to see what is really needed in the system to create change. And notice how I said that, right? I didn't say what we have to change, or what we have to change with our kids, or how they have to change, or how we have to change for them. I said what has to change in the system, because the system includes so many aspects, right? It's the relationship with self, relationship with the parent, relationship with the environment, and all the stuff that's going on. Yeah, so that's why those two things, no repression. See, I almost said no rejection again. No repression, so that we're not bypassing our feelings and ignoring them, and no projection, so that we're not dumping them on our kids, which causes them to pull away and makes the whole situation harder. And also then we feel bad and we feel disconnected from ourselves even more, and then it makes it even harder. So working on those two things is really, really powerful. And then working with our kids also, one of the things to keep in mind is again that what I've been calling iceberg consciousness, and I think that the iceberg consciousness is really important. It's that awareness that there's a lot more happening under the surface. There's a lot more impacts and influences on the system or on the situation than we maybe are aware of at first glance. That when a kid is making certain choices, that there can be a whole lot of stuff underneath the surface that's contributing to that choice. We may or may not know the exact things, but just being aware of that and seeing kids that way can make a huge difference. It can make it feel a lot less personal. It can make it feel a lot less intimidating or overwhelming. Maybe it can feel overwhelming at first when you first start to notice the iceberg. That's why I hesitated a bit there. I don't want to say it's less overwhelming, because it actually can be more overwhelming at first. But really, once we recognize the iceberg and we kind of have that, we kind of see the iceberg on a regular basis, it helps our perspective. You know, it's like, I mean, I actually love those pictures of the iceberg that they have on the internet. There's so many of them, right? At the top, it's got like anger and fear, and then underneath it has like all the different emotions that contribute to it, and all the different emotions that are part of those things. And if we only look at the part of the iceberg that's visible, it's quite challenging, because it's actually the effect is actually 10 times what we see, and it seems disproportionate. And that's because we're not looking at the depth of what's underneath there. And so that's one thing. And I didn't say what those things for the iceberg is. That's something to look into. But just knowing that it's there, because what happens, it can be helpful, because what happens is we can create or activate stories in our heads about why these things are happening. They don't care. They only care about this. They only care about that. They don't want to, which isn't really true necessarily. Yeah. It's just that a lot of the time it's just that they haven't figured out why they might want to. And that's actually the next thing that I want to talk about, is what I call what's in it for me, which I guess is, the acronym would be WIFM. I guess not everything has to have an acronym. But what's in it for me is really important. We often forget that when we're working with our kids, that in order to get them, see, I'm saying get, in order to inspire them to want to do the thing, like the toothbrushing or the food or the chores or the dishes or whatever, and it has to, for them to be able to do it in a self-regulated, self-sustaining way, one of the things that's important is for them to understand what's in it for them. I was watching this post, and it was a similar, what was it? It was it was about a kid who, every time their friends come over, and the kid's like 6 or 7, and every time their friends come over, they're much meaner and colder and ruder to the mom, and she just really upset about that, and it's really hurtful. Which is, as I said in the beginning, her feelings are entirely valid and reasonable in a situation like that. And then a lot of the suggestions were, well, tell your kid how much it hurts you. Tell your kid how much it upsets you. Ask them, would you like to be treated that way, and all that kind of stuff. And doing so, there's an assumption that if you tell the kid, oh, it hurts me when you do this, that they're going to want to change because they see that it hurts you. And this is, again, ignoring the iceberg of the different causes and the different ways that these things are affected. And also because that is focusing on the impact on the parent and not looking at the what's in it for me for the kid. It doesn't automatically teach that it makes sense for the kid to care about the impact on the parent. And oftentimes when we tell a kid, oh, when you did this, it upset me or it hurt me, we actually do create the opposite condition inside of them, because it feels like we're saying they've done something wrong, and wrongness leads to disconnection and distance and protection, right? And even for me, again, I say even for me, not that I'm special, just that I've been working at this for a long time, that for me, who's been working on my inner resources for a long time, when somebody expresses something to me from a spirit of wrongness, it's really, really, really hard for me to hear it. And, if it's somebody that I respect and I care about and I want their feedback, even then I have to breathe through it. I'm like, okay, Vivek, this person is not attacking you. They don't realize even that they're projecting wrongness on you. And it's activating all of your stuff. So just breathe through it, love yourself, and listen and take in the information, process the feelings later, be open to it. And I have to talk myself through it, And I think if you've ever given me any kind of feedback, and I'm hesitating or something like that, it's not because I'm defensive, or either it is because I'm defensive and I don't want to be, and I'm trying not to be. But that defensiveness comes up in me so easily. So easily. That's why one of my old one-liners is the person receiving the feedback has a higher responsibility in the interaction than the person giving the feedback. And I don't really think it's higher. I just say it that way because it's contentious, and I like to be contentious sometimes. But also because we don't talk about that very often. We don't talk about receiving the feedback, right? Very often, and how important that is. Although what's in it for me is similar to that we want our kids to understand what the benefit to them is. And so this requires some thinking. What's the benefit to our kids in cooperating with us? What's the benefit to them in keeping the house in a certain way? And sometimes that can be hard for us to figure out, and I think that's a worthwhile line of thinking. And that's something that honestly even would be worth thinking about, writing about, making notes on, just trying to figure that out. But in order to do that, we have to tune into their perspective on things, their values on things, their understanding of things, what needs would be met for them. And like that story that I talked about, how I helped a extremely wild and rambunctious 6-year-old who was constantly running out into the street and would never look both ways. In one day, I helped them learn to self-regulate and stop themselves from running to the street and look both ways. And because I made the whole experience about them, I helped them tune into what's in it for me, and it made sense to them. It was like, this is something I want. It was something that this kid wanted. And because they wanted it, they were able to figure out a way to get it. And so that's another thing, is how can we help our kids understand what's in it for me, what's in it for them, right? And it's more than just telling them. It's also helping them feel it, helping them feel those benefits, helping them feel the connection to the needs through our relationship, through our interaction, through the modeling, through the feedback that we give them. I'm not a big fan of using praise to manipulate. But at the same time, feedback from humans is a natural thing, and it's actually an ongoing thing, because we're giving non-verbal, unconscious feedback to the other people in our environment all the time. And again, I always like to say, if something's happening all the time, we might as well interact with it consciously. That's where SMABO comes in. So once we have an idea, and SMABO stands for Small Moments Affect Big Ones, and that's where, that's what I talk about, how all of our small interactions with our kids are opportunities to build layers, to educate, to inspire, to help create certain minds, inspire certain mindsets, create certain mindsets, to create positive associations with things where maybe they have a negative association right now. Because once kids have a negative association with something, it's really hard for them to engage in it. And it takes work for us to shift that negative association into a positive association. Once there's a positive association, the thing can have a life of its own, and it becomes much easier to work from. The thing is, because our own emotions can get to us, and again, I'm not saying that with blame, and I really want to caution you not to take blame or shame around that. It's more like that's how the mechanism works. That's how the mechanism works, and we can also work with the mechanism. But understanding how the mechanism of our minds and our feelings work is worthwhile. And so then the projection part can actually, we do those projections in small ways, and those layers build up and they create the larger patterns that we see. And so tuning into the needs of our kids, like the need for belonging, the need for connection, the need for learning and play and autonomy and all sorts of things like that. We have opportunities with those needs to use small moments, everyday moments, to help them see how those needs are being met through certain mindsets and behaviors. And that kind of education it doesn't happen automatically. It's something we have to do consciously. You know, like if I have something I want to teach my kid, I'll think about it for days about how I want to implement it. And then I'll start looking for I'm doing it now. I'm always doing it. I'm doing it with her all the time. I'm always looking in like, how am I going to bring this up and where can I bring that up? And then I'll be awkward about it. And I'll do it wrong sometimes, or I'll overdo it or I'll underdo it. But I'm always trying to figure it out. We can never be perfect at it. We're always kind of stumbling along. But the idea is to have that whole environment, whole relationship work going on, because it's like the don't do and the do that I talk about, right? I say there's things that we don't do that we're trying not to do. Wrongness and punishment and consequences, coercion and all that kind of stuff. But it's not enough to just not do it. We also want to have the do. What are we doing that helps inspire the other mindset, inspire the positive associations? And that's something that we maybe don't always pay attention to. And especially if, we're dealing with our own mental health and stuff too, it can be really hard to engage in that kind of stuff. And the reason I mention it is because it's still the most effective. It's the most effective way to inspire change. It's the most effective way to teach. And that whole thing about, it's not just modeling, right? A lot of the time we hear, just model. But that, for me, that's not enough. Because that's why I created modeling out loud, which is partially one of the strategies. I'm not going to go into it now because I know I've gone into it for hours in the past, but there's a lot of different ways to work with our kids and to help them learn that stuff. There's 2 more points I want to make. I'm going on a bit longer than I had anticipated, but even the short version of this is long because it's an intense subject. Ah, goodness me. So then the next one is about values. And I just recently saw a post of mine from like 2013 or something like that I'm going to edit and share shortly. And in it I was talking about how we can often assume that the adult value for something is more valid than the child value for something. For example, one of my favorite examples of it is, are the noisy kids bothering the other adults in the restaurant, or are the adults in the restaurant bothering the kids with their quiet? Now, of course, the majority of the people in the restaurant are adults, and so we might think, it's probably the kids and they should be respectful of the adults. But then we're saying that the majority sets the values, and then we know that that's not the most intelligent and certainly not the most kind and compassionate and inclusive way to do things. But then when we do that, and when we pass that on to our kids through our mindset, unconsciously, most of the time it's unconsciously, but when we pass that on to them and they feel we're taking their value as less valid, then again they either lose touch with their own sense of values, or they have to protect their own sense of values. And then, again, all this other stuff gets associated with it. Relational stuff, autonomy stuff, self-worth stuff. And it's all this stuff that isn't really about the value and about the content. It adds all of these extra layers to it. Another example is toys on the floor, keeping a neat room, doing dishes, when we assume that our value around it, even if it really makes sense to us, we assume our value around it is the more valid value. There's a lot of V's in that sentence. They feel it for sure. And then it makes it really hard to collaborate and get cooperation. It's hard to switch that because in our heads it really does make sense. Like I remember I sometimes talk about this day I had this epiphany like a decade ago. Maybe it's probably more than a decade. It's probably like 15 years ago now. But I had this epiphany in my marriage where I suddenly realized that I wasn't right about everything. And I know it sounds ridiculous and funny, but it's really not, because I really did think that for a long time. Acted that way for a long time. And I remember I don't know how it happened, but I remember that feeling like, I was like, oh, her perspective on things matters, is as valid as mine, even if it's different. And it really helped me because I stopped wanting to be right. But at the same time, I still thought my value on it was right. I still thought that, because if I didn't think it was right, then I would have a different value. I had the values I did because they made sense to me. But what I stopped doing was putting my personal relationship to my values, making them more valid. And so what I started to do was I started to become very, very curious about her value around a thing, and why she felt that way, and why it was important to her, and how it made her feel, and how it affected her sense of herself, and how it affected her sense of her needs. And when I started to really do that and really really get into that, she started to trust it more and started to pay more attention to my needs and really care more about my needs. Not from a place of having to worry about how I'm going to react, but more like, oh, this is great. It feels great to be asked those questions and to be thought of that way. I want to do that too. And now 15 years later, we have much more of a flow of us looking for each other's, how we can look out for each other's needs. Like she has a whole thing around aesthetics that I just don't have. And I've had to work really hard to see those things. But now I do, I do so much better. And every now and then I'll say, I don't think we should get that because I think you're not going to enjoy the way that looks if we put it there and if we do it that way. And I think we could do with something like this. And she's like, wow, thank you. And before I would have been like, well, this is more practical. Let's just use this one. But it's not really practical relationally or environmentally if it's causing her, unhappiness and not meeting her needs as well. So, and sometimes we have what I call the reverse argument now, where I'll argue for her needs and she'll argue for my needs. Yeah, but Vivek, this one's more effective. I say, I know it's more effective, but you're not going to be happy seeing it every day. And she's like, well, that's true. And I'm like, can we find something that will meet your aesthetic sense and my practical needs? And now I love the reverse argument. And I make a big deal out of reverse arguments in our home too, by the way. Reverse arguments are the best. So the values, recognizing each other's values and the way we operate on what we value and being curious about it and really wanting to know and understand it can lead us to a much more cooperative relationship. And then we can have real collaboration at that point. Then we can have people really sharing their needs and really sharing what makes sense to them and finding ways to incorporate both those things. And but that whole thing is a whole different mindset, and it takes time to work through it. But it's definitely worth the work. It's definitely worth the work because every time we slip back into the other, it puts us further behind, and then we're having to play catch up, which is going to happen anyways. Which is why the no rejection, no repression, no projection stuff is really important, so that we can keep coming back to it, keep coming back to it, keep coming back to it. All right. As you can see, I could easily go on for another couple of hours with this, but I'm not going to. I'm going to stop now. But I hope that there was something helpful for you in here that you can take and use. It was mostly conceptual. I didn't give a lot of actual practical suggestions. Hopefully some of the concepts can be helpful to you as you're thinking about how to work with your kids in a different way to get the kind of relationship and environment that you want in your families and your homes.